Okay, everyone, it's 12 o'clock. As soon as I say that, see people start coming in. They know it's like they have a sixth sense that I'm about to get started. So we'll get them on in. We are really excited for our Lunch and Learn today. I wish we were going to be doing this in person because you all would love Stephanie face to face, but you're going to love getting to know her virtually as well. We are only having 2 Lunch and Learns in September. It's with everyone's school starting back and a lot of people are getting back to more of a normal routine at work. It's getting a little difficult to do something every week, so we're going to have 2 in September. We have our CANS assessment training today, and then in 2 weeks from today, on the 22nd, it will be Brandy Purswell from BCFS talking to us about the ETV, the Educational Transition Vouchers. So you will want to be on that training or watch that video if you have teenagers. One of my girls on my case is starting college today, so everyone give high fives. So she's going to defeat the odds. She's going to beat the odds, and she's going to start college today. And I'm so proud of her, and I'm so excited. But understanding how these ETV benefits work and all the benefits that are available to our older teens are really important. And so make sure that you either join us in 2 weeks for that or that you watch it by video. So today, Stephanie Duncan has been in child welfare for over 10 years. You saw that in the bio that I sent out. She is a licensed social worker and she works at New Horizons. And she's going to be telling you more about her role over the phase program and what CANS assessment is all about and why it's important for us to understand CANS and utilize CANS. But what you mostly need to know about Stephanie, I think, is that her heart and her passion for children, for teenagers, for children in foster care. And so she is passionate about that. She is knowledgeable. If we ever have a question about our CANS assessments or the child's needs, we can reach out to Stephanie, and she's a great resource that we have over there. You know, with the partnership with To Engage, To Engage is New Horizons and the Texas Family Initiative combined to be To Engage. So I think her role, I don't know if it's complicated her role a little bit, if it's changed her role at all, but she is going to be available to guide us through this entire process. So as always, if you stay till the end, we'll have door prizes at the end. Also use the chat box. Don't think, oh, I have that question, but I'll ask it later. Put it in there so that you don't forget. Stephanie, when she's done with the presentation, will go through that chat box, and then you can also ask any question that you have live. So we are really excited. Stephanie, thank you for coming. We've, I think this is twice we rescheduled because we were trying to do it in person. So thank you for hanging in there with us and for agreeing to do this via Zoom. And I am going to turn this over to you now, and you can share your screen and take control. So y'all give her a warm welcome. I can't talk today.
A silent applause. And you guys, I do lots of Zoom trainings right now. It's becoming a specialty for a lot of us, I guess. So feel free to just jump in and ask whatever question you have. I'm really comfortable with just kind of being informal and taking whatever feedback or questions that come up. Also, I'm going to have hopefully one of our therapists, Crystal Leak, pop in whenever she's done with the session to come over and just meet you guys. I know that we've had some CASA referrals to our therapy program, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But I wanted you to see their faces. Jason couldn't make it because he has a lunch session, but Crystal's going to pop in for a second. So I'll tell you guys, I know that the last time I saw anybody from CASA really in person, I think was in February at the conference that we had. And I was also talking about CANS. So if anyone was there, we'll kind of go over the same thing. Who all was there then? That helps me too. Okay, a couple of you. So some of this will be a review, and then I'll try to pop in some extra things here and there. But we, through all of the COVID stuff, all of my therapists and case managers were home for, a month and a half, probably from March to mid-April. while quarantine things were really at a high, and we transitioned all of our services to telehealth. So everyone was doing therapy and case management out of their homes. It's definitely not something that stops just because mental health issues especially are important right now for everybody, but for our foster kids as well. So we wanted to make sure that we had a stable environment for them. So right now we're kind of in a hybrid. We're offering telehealth to those who wish to have that, and in person for those who are just not comfortable with telehealth, because we want to make sure we're getting them the care that they need. So one of the things that we are doing with our telehealth is, because schools are kind of restricting outside resources on campus, a lot of the counselors are setting up a computer or device so that the kid can meet us through Zoom or Teams, which is what we use as our secure system, so that we can do therapy during the day while they're at school, if for some reason we can't meet them face to face. So we're trying to be really flexible, coming up with all new ways to do this. And in the middle of all that, with all of our case managers working not in the office, we actually combine two programs, which is our PHASE program, which is our community case management skills program, and our therapy center. So we're all now in one building, and we're under construction right now. It's right next to the Audrey Grace House. And we're trying to design a one-stop shop for a family resource center. So all of the rooms in the building are dedicated to being able to check them out and using them for a meeting with a family or a family session. And our therapists are checking out rooms to meet with them. And we're trying to create a really homey type environment so that everyone can just come and feel comfortable and just relax into our space. And it means that our case managers and therapists have been booted from their personal offices. Some of them we're sharing anyways. But what we're doing is not having any desks, not having any equipment in those areas. And then they're able to work from home on their notes or, their contacts and things like that. Or we have a shared kind of workspace for everybody. So really, we're just trying to rededicate the building to, being here to meet the needs of families. And if you guys ever need a space to meet, maybe with a child from the Audrey Grace House, it's just like a couple of, it's like a 1-minute walk from the Audrey Grace House. So feel free to contact me, and we can work on getting you guys the space reserved. I don't know if anybody has an Audrey Grace House kid on your caseload, but it's definitely a resource for you guys, and want to make sure that you feel comfortable. Once we get everything looking a little more glamorous and maybe COVID restrictions kind of let up, we also want to have an open house and let people walk through. But if you have more questions or, are curious about the space, feel free to contact me and we'll work something out. So that's kind of our exciting change in programs that's going on. And so one of the things that we are continuing to do at our family center, and we're doing them virtual and in person, are hands assessments. So let me see if I can share my screen because I have a few things. Let's see. I'm gonna just share my screen because I have a few different things to pop up. So first I'll start with PowerPoint. Can you guys see the PowerPoint presentation? Awesome. Okay, so one of the things that we do is our KANS assessment. It's not the most glamorous thing that we do. It's not the most exciting thing, but every kid that comes into care from ages 3 all the way through 17 has to have an initial KANS and an annual KANS. And we like to use that assessment as a way to really meet kids, meet foster parents, figure out what's going on at the front door so that we can continue to support them, hopefully with therapy, but with other supports as well. So when I did this presentation before to kind of a larger group of professionals, we talked about, it's a form, it's a tool, it's a framework. We want to make sure that we're using it not just as a form. And that's mostly a reminder for us, but for other therapists as well. I have Crystal coming in right now. So we want to make sure that we're using this form as a tool and a framework. And so we'll kind of walk through that before I'm going to put Crystal on in just a second. But there's two different parts of the CANs. There's the strengths, and then there's also the needs. And so what we're doing is walking through the form, and we want to make sure that we are looking at strengths and needs. And it's fairly comprehensive. There's lots of information that they're sharing when they complete a CANS assessment. And we want to make sure that we're using this instead of any other assessment. And so Crystal's not using one and another therapist isn't using another one, so that we're preventing duplicate assessments. So when a child moves from place to place to place, that same assessment is what we use. So they don't have to go do this intensive intake process every time they move placement, which is really hard to just share your story over and over and over again. So with the strengths and the needs, we are measuring on a 4-point rating scale. And I'll show you guys some examples at the end, because I know that especially with some CASAs that are looking at treatment plans, you guys have had questions about what that even means. And Crystal could give you some insight on that as well. But some of the topics are family relationships, optimism, education, talent, spirituality, and overall resiliency. And then for our needs, we're looking at anything from sexual aggression, runaway behaviors, fire setting, all kinds of things that can be, things that we need to know about a child so that we can immediately put a safety plan in place should that be a high level need. I'm going to see if I can stop sharing and put Crystal's pretty face on the screen.
Oh, well, thank you.
So she is one of the therapists at the center.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you kind of bio yourself a little bit, but we actually stole her from the Audrey Grace house. So some of you guys may have known her from then. So she has an amazing amount of experience, not only from there, but also from inpatient programs, even in other states. So we really value the experience that she has working with our older kiddos, and then she also really enjoys play therapy, and she's crawling around on the floor playing games and stuff all the time with our younger kiddos as well. And also we try to make sure that we're working with the foster parents, so incorporating them in instruction and learning, working on bonding and playful engagement and things like that through our TBRI program, which Crystal is a practitioner in TBRI. So she is kind of an expert in that area as far as giving instruction, going alongside the parent to make sure that they are reinforcing what's happening in therapy and deepening their relationship with the kids.
Yeah.
So let's kind of take it.
So we also uniquely are able to work with our biological parents, especially during reunification, during that process. So we've been doing a lot more of that lately. We do a lot of out-of-the-box things over here, and we do create space and time to talk to. Actually, I just got out of a meeting with a CASA volunteer just now. We create space and time to talk with CASAs and to engage workers and all of that, where you're not necessarily going to see that in other outpatients, because they see people and whoever's in their office is who they see, and that's what they bill for. But we just go ahead and build it into our framework here at New Horizons to really make sure that's part of that kids team. And we tend to get asked a lot to do some letters for court. So we prefer letters because no therapist ever wants to be in court. We're not always as beneficial as you think. Well, I see a lot of familiar names and faces. See Rebel, and I think I saw Sandra. I don't know if she popped off yet on there somewhere. Oh, there she is. I see Sandra. Hey, Sandra. So some of you I've worked with directly with kiddos you've had. So I'm excited always to get a chance to talk to you guys. So the CANS, let's talk about that specifically today. The CANS is a very interesting tool that's very misunderstood. I myself misunderstood it about the first year I was using it in Texas. My experience prior to Texas was Alaska. And so we have different assessments there. And so as we were learning more about the CANS assessment, it's actually probably more effective as a therapist doing outpatient than ever it was in residential, because in residential, it was just pulling all the data and throwing it in. We were already pulling that data for other assessments we were doing. So you can send somebody to a CANS, and I have seen some CANS that I've had to read because I'm doing the annual, because remember they have to have them once a year. And they were it was like, what was the point of that? It really was kind of a useless piece of document. And a lot of that has to do with how we're trained in the CANS to be a CANS provider is very limited in some ways. So when you're looking at the CANS and you see, and I've got a copy of a pretend CANS right here, what you guys get and what you see on Health Passport is if it's an issue, it'll pop up in number form.
Now let me just pull one so they can
Yeah,
see.
pull one and then we can talk off that one. It'll be easier.
Where is it? I'm just going to share my screen again and then I'll pull it up. So just give me a second. There's our.
As she's pulling that up, so there's going to be like a number section. And if it's a strength or a need is based off of how that number works.
There it is.
Here we go. So
the only one I have is just the years in care and placement history because I just kept the clinical impressions on there.
So those parts are, if they answer questions a certain way, then that's going to create me as the assessor to ask more specific questions in that area. As we know, all kids come from different backgrounds and different things going on. When you do a CANS in the first 30 days of placement, especially when they're a young child, oftentimes the foster parent who's bringing them to the CANS doesn't know all the things. And so your CANS are not that great. The CANS that are better are the foster parents who've had that child for a longer amount of time and truly know the history and background going on with that child, or older kids. Now, I do have some teenagers where I put in my assessment, this kid was pretty much lying the whole time. And, because all we can assess is what we're being told. Now, under the clinical impression, background needs, you'll see right on, I was going to point at it like y'all could see my finger, that's silly.
Here, I'll do my, can you see my cursor?
Can you see the cursor? Yes, okay, thank you, Dolores.
All right.
So the clinical impressions, that's basically your background information. So typically what I write in that is, I might say, this is a 3-year-old Hispanic female brought today by foster parents. Now, the reason I don't typically put foster parents' names in there pre-termination is because we need to protect the identity of a biological parent, got a hold of that information. If it's post-termination and this is going to be the adoptive parent, then I will put that. So all the family questions, I will actually say, if it's an adoptive parent or someone in the process of adoption, I'll say all of the family questions are now going to be about the adoptive parent. Mm-hmm. Where a lot of assessors don't do that, part of why I'm doing that is so if you're reading it, who was all the questions about. Otherwise, the family questions have to do with the biological family, because there are questions on there like, do we get along? Are there problems? Is the kid at risk of being removed from the home? Well, they're already removed, so then you would say yes, and you would explain. And then this is just, clinical impressions are also just like a little bit of background and history, and overall, were they participating during the CANS? Were they not? If I have a young kid that's like 3, and I see a lot of emotional developmental delays, because a lot of times we will see they're doing all the things they should do physically, developmentally, but emotionally, they may be way behind, showing some attachment issues, those types of things. I'll put that clinical impression there. And a lot of times I will also put some in a narrative, and then in the background needs, which is right under that, if you see, that's just where are they at with all the things. I don't tend to be as good to say, I do sometimes to say like, oh, they need to follow all their Texas Health Step appointments. But some of the kids may also show some developmental being behind physically or sensory. And I've got about 3 I'm doing some play therapy with right now that are 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And I'm part of a team trying to decide, okay, are we just this far behind because of the amount of trauma that happened? Or is there some autism there? And it's really hard to tell until they catch up. So that's something I would write in a CANS, for instance, just saying that these are the people on their team. So maybe their background needs are physical abuse, substance abuse of a parent, need for a psych eval or something like that. And then you go under treatment targets. So when you're seeing the treatment targets, a lot of time the clinical impressions you're already going to know, or you're going to be like, man, they didn't put this, 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 or this. It may just be because the assessor wasn't told, so they didn't know. Treatment targets, if they're in counseling or if they're in occupational therapy. I'm thinking of one I did recently where the child's actually in occupational therapy as well as physical therapy. So I went ahead and put that on the treatment targets too. And then I would say we'll continue until that clinician discharges them. Sometimes I'll have kids come in that are not doing some type of behavioral health therapy or mental health therapy, and I'll go ahead and recommend that because it's clear they just need to talk. Like maybe they came in and behaviorally they're fine, but they just like everything out, and the parents like, oh wow, I didn't know they were thinking all those things. And so we might make those treatment recommendations there as to what they either are experiencing or might need. I've had one kid where I did recommend they go talk to the physician about occupational therapy because developmentally they were pretty behind. And it's not in my clinical realm to fully assess that, but it is in my clinical realm to recognize it and say, go talk to a physician about that. And that's where that kind of is a little bit different, and maybe a little different depending on which license is the person doing the assessment. And then in this anticipated outcome area, these are just guesstimations. Is the prognosis good? Is it bad? What do they have around them that's helping them, have that support that they may or may not need? Some kids come in and they have a lot of support. We've been doing a lot more in the last 6 months, probably kinship families, and the kinship families just don't know what's available to them. So we are working really hard, actually doing a lot of research. Stephanie's doing a lot of research to see how our center can be better helpful for those kinship families, because they do need a lot more resources. Foster families just have it at their disposal pretty quickly, but we're learning kinship families don't always know where to get that. So we may put that in there. And then strengths that support the plan, typically here, it really depends on the assessor. A lot of times what I see most assessors put, including myself and Jason, is just things that might be keeping them from functioning at a healthier level, as well as things that are helping them function at a very healthy level. So in this strength, you'll see, hey, this is a really resilient child, might benefit from counseling, but may not need it, because they are so resilient and they get their needs met in a healthy way. Or they have I've had some foster parents who have a really good relationship with the bio parents. And so this kid is just thriving in foster care because there's good relationships going on. Whereas sometimes we're just not going to be able to have that. At other times, I will say I do try to put in mind when I see a kid that's been moved and moved and moved and moved, especially in that first 3 years, because we found a family member and then we found another and then we found another. Sometimes I'm like, they just need to stay put. Like if at all possible, it would be good for them to not be moved again until there's some clarification of what's going on, because the child's behaviors are indicative of, hey, we're creating some attachment issues, those kind of things. So we'll see those in the objectives and then the strengths as well.
One of the challenges or the limitations to the CANS that we see is that when you may be reading a CANS and you've really spent time to get to know a child, just remember that the CANS was done, in the first 30 days of placement, usually right there at the beginning. And Crystal gets to see them for an hour and a half, and to do everything you can possibly do for a CANS. So there really may be things that are overlooked as far as centerpiece strengths, especially, this one, this little boy says, he attempts to be avoidant and antisocial, but he was open to discussing things once they kind of became comfortable. And that's in one session. So imagine when you're meeting with a child and having a relationship over time, that they're going to open up even more and we're going to hear more. Right now, the CANS is only done annually for most of our kids. But maybe in the future, it'll be something that's quarterly, because once you have 90 days with the kid, if Crystal's the practitioner that's continuing to work with them, she would be able to then say, oh, I wrote this last time, but I see this as a centerpiece strength now. Like, I really feel like he's blossomed and opened up and told me about art and how much he loves art. And he's won a few contests, and, I'm going to give him a 3 on that. And that's going to be a centerpiece strength for him. And so when we're crafting our treatment plan, we really need to make sure that that's a part of it and we're weaving that in.
And really on the service plans that you'll see, I don't think they've changed much since I was part of doing them. I don't have to do them now, which is so great. But when I was at the RTC and was having to do them, well, in an RTC setting, you're doing a CANS every 90 days. You're doing the CANS at the same time as the service plan. So you'll see, depending on where they're coming from, how that flows in that service plan. And really, for a kid who's in a foster home, your CANS after about 60 days is already out of date.
Mm-hmm.
It really is, because so much changes in that 60 days. And so you just, it becomes, as long as they followed through with what the CANS said to do, if you see in the CANS, oh, it suggested they go to counseling, and you talk to the foster parent and they started taking them to counseling, then what you really need is, how's counseling going? So they follow up on all those things. Now, if you'll see this very last box, it says, based on the CANS ratings that were submitted on this child, the following services are recommended. Realize, please, that that is pre-populated. All the other parts, I actually type in as the assessor. This is pre-populated based off of how they answered all the questions, and I don't remember how many there are. There are a lot of questions. So that's a pre-populated. So sometimes if a kid's having sensory issues, and I know it's a mental health issue, if I've gotten to where when I realized that, you know, I'll put it in there, doesn't need to follow up with a physician, the physician's already aware. Or you're putting it on there because they're already receiving treatment, but you're still having to click a number for it. It will pre-populate that they should have this, 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 or this as a follow-up. So that's where your narrative pieces are very important. And if you have a strong assessor who understands the CANS and the way it can be used as a really positive tool for foster care, you're going to see them put a little bit more in that very first section.
I'll go back to that so we
Yes.
can see it. Oh, it's on the other page. I did a, oh no, I can't go to the page. There, I did a little, you know, delete and scan.
So the clinical impressions, you'll see, if you ever get one of my CANs, I tend to be pretty heavy on the clinical impressions. And that's because there's a lot going on that if they're in their first 30 days of foster care, and I'm actually learning all that in that 1 hour, that means that somebody else may or may not be aware of those things. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they've been in treatment for a year and they're a really resilient kid and things are going pretty well, that may be a little shorter. Or if I did the CANs last year on them, I'll just say update from last year's CANs, and here's where we are, mm-hmm. especially if it's somebody we're already seeing in therapy. So really the main things to remember is the clinical impression, background needs, treatment targets. Those sections are put in by the assessor. If it is an assessor who works with foster kids, you're going to see a different assessment coming from that than some of the assessments I've seen, where it was almost like people were checking a box. Like there might have been one sentence under clinical impression and one sentence under the background needs and one sentence under treatment targets. Have you all seen some of those? I just hardly had anything in it. Yeah. And that's why, because this part of the CANs was actually not trained in the training. And so once people realize that, you're like, oh, so you'll find with Jason and I, we tend to put a little more in there because we want to help bring it together because we see all sides of foster care. So that's part of why we do what we do.
And that's where, you know, we really want to pull this together from just being a form that we have to check off a box to being a framework. And I know that for some of, especially some CASA volunteers that have come up to me and asked questions about CANs, about some of the ratings and things like that, they really are digging into, you know, that doesn't make sense for this kid. And that's important for you guys to know, you know, your kids. And so when a treatment team meeting is happening and they're just like, we're just copy and pasting the CANs, you know, impressions and such, because, you know, you have so many, what is it, every 90 days for the first however long to do. So the CANs isn't changing, but your relationship with the child is changing and they're opening up. And so having a therapist that's working with the kid to give additional input, you know, to not just rely back on that CANs from the first couple of weeks of placement is really helpful. And so for you guys to understand that, yeah, we want this to be a tool and we're going to fill it out as best we can. We're not going to do it again for another year on most of our kids. So unless they're treatment for emotional services and disorders, and then they'll get it every 90 days, but we're not seeing as many of those.
I would say the one thing I would add to is a couple of situations in which a kid was moved and they were being brought by a brand new to them foster parent. and it was an annual CANS and I didn't do the original CANS, sometimes there's stuff on there the foster parent doesn't know. Like these foster parents aren't always given the background and history. And so they accept on these kids and then they don't know, oh, they actually had physical abuse, this and this on their original CANs. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that was there. Or if you know a kid and you're like, man, there's nothing about this background stuff, that means your foster parent probably doesn't know. And you probably need to educate them on what happened to that child and how that maybe would have affected their CANs and recommendations, if that makes sense. So just being aware when you're in those treatment meetings, your foster parents for whatever reason, aren't always told enough information to seek the best treatment for these kiddos. And so we want to be advocating for that for them.
I wanted to show you guys the manual, and I don't know if you guys have the manual. This is a deep dive. So some of you maybe, the clinical impressions are a great place to start. But if you're really wanting to look through the CANs and say, that clinical impression really doesn't make sense, and I see all these zeros, 1, 2s, 3s, 4s, what does that mean? The CANs manual actually gives you, for each thing that is being assessed, there is, a narrative rating for each of these. So as well, 0 through 3, there's 4 ratings, but 0 through 3, no, there's no 4. Don't look for that number. Sorry. So, this is an example of substance abuse. So 0 would be, no substance abuse use or difficulties. And then you can see the rating goes up from there until you get to 3, where it's severe substance abuse dependence. So it's pretty descriptive. And so those numbers, it's not just like a Likert scale where Crystal's like, I'll give them a 2. Yeah. She's using this manual as a tool to make sure that she's giving accurate. And then for any assessor who's doing a CANS, hopefully, with this kind of a manual, the goal is that no matter who saw that child for a CANS, that they would give him the same score based on these descriptors.
And I will say too that I've had some CANs where they were 30 days into care, so they're new to all of us and new to all of you, and nobody really knows. And there was an outcry in the CANs. And so I found myself within 24 hours making a report, because we have to specifically ask questions about, were you physically abused? Were you sexually abused? Was there neglect? I don't just take for granted that if it's in their history, I ask every time, even if it's an annual CANS, even if it's with a kid I've seen for a year, because I've had this happen. I've had the kid in therapy off and on. They already had a CANS done, the denial of everything. They denied it to me their first time in session. And suddenly we're doing a CANS and they said, oh, well, actually, so-and-so touched me in this part of my body and I didn't like it. And within 24, and then I'm having to make reports, because sometimes that's just as simple as we're a year further and we have new words in our brain. So what we didn't know was, oh, a penis before we suddenly know. Okay, so that's the one that typically I find if assessor is not asking every time, that's not good. I also had recently a foster parent tell me, or I'm sorry, a kinship parent tell me that they came here for play therapy. We were working on play therapy, and they said, well, I'm just curious about the CANs. And so they had some questions about the CANs experience they had, because most of our deeper questions with littles, like if I'm assessing a 3-year-old, they're just kind of playing and I'm watching them play and I'm interacting with them some to kind of check their social skills and those kind of things. But then your younger older kids like 4, 5, 6, and 7 who maybe don't fully understand their story, I might be pulling in that kinship family back first to find out what language are we using about that mom and dad are on drugs. And so just giving the respect there. But a kid should always be part of some of the CANs. So I had a kinship parent tell me that they had a CANs for the kid and the kid was never present for a telehealth CANs. And I'm not sure how that assessor did that, because they have to be there for part of the time, because you can't assess somebody you've not seen. You can't do the CANs only based off of what the foster parent or kinship parents say. So if you hear that, you might call whatever agency those are and ask, how come the kid was never in the room? So I don't even know, like that doesn't make any sense, the way we're trained in CANs. So if you hear that, you might want to look into that source, because that is important, that the kid be part of that in some way.
Yeah, I wanted to show you guys the manual as far as the strengths go as well. So you can see the 0 through 3. So 0 is a high strength. So when you're looking at like the family, sorry, I'm pointing again.
She's pointing.
Yeah,
It wasn't just me.
I'm tactile. So you can imagine me pointing to the 0, you know, significant family strength, and then down to a 3 where it indicates a child with no known family strengths. So it feels a little bit flip-flopped from the needs, but what happens is all of your 0s and 1s are going to end up being positive things, like either, you know, there's not a need in this area, or there's a significant strength in this area, and then your 2s and 3s are going to be your red flags or your alarms. So on either end of the spectrum. So just, you know, if you see family strength and you see a 0, it feels negative, but it means, you know, a centerpiece strength. So it takes your brain a little bit to kind of rewire to see that the right way.
And typically if you have a lot of 2s and 3s, you're talking about a child who either has recently come from a psychiatric or RTC, or just is not adjusting well, or someone who's probably being assessed to be placed in a higher behavior needs, because that does indicate there's a lot more going on. Versus a 1, it's kind of like we're watching it, or they're already in treatment for it. Okay, so if there's a lot of 1s, it doesn't mean that there's no needs there. It just means they're receiving active involvement with it, or they really just are. I mean, we've had a few that, you know, they were removed so young and they're coming in for a CANS because they turned 3, but they've been in the same home and, you know, foster or kinship care. They're nearing the end of the parent court hearing and all of that, and they're doing great. So they don't necessarily need to just go to any more services or things like that. That's typically when we see that. Or they were placed with a kinship family that they were close with. Those kids I'm seeing tend to do better in their, like, assessment wise, I see that there's a lot more strengths in those situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as far as the 0s on the strength side, Dr. Lyons describes centerpiece strength as something that's just like fundamental. Mm-hmm. So a child that says, yeah, I have regular visitation, that's not going to get you a 0 on a family strength assessment. It needs to be, you know, I, you know, have 17 aunts and uncles, and I, you know, talk to all of them every night, and, you know, I'm exaggerating, but, you know, it has to be something that really stands out to Crystal or Jason as they're doing the assessment, to be, that is something that we want to hold on to and weave all the way through the treatment plan. And so you'll see a lot of 1s on the strengths, but not a lot of 0s, because you really want that 0 to be something that is just like outstanding, or something that they've been, like, as far as a talent, something they've been recognized for. Like, hey, they're in, you know, they've tested into a special program like an Adams or something like that, because they're really excelling in math and science. Or they've won an award for this thing, or, you know, they're
or
coaches.
Other times I'll put strengths as 0 if they're developmentally right where they need to.
Yeah, so
because
some of
they
them
don't have any anything where, really, like, if they're educationally, if they're doing really well in school, then they're at a 0 because the school's working well. Yeah, I think yeah. And because child who's in school, they're involved, they're exceeding expectations. So some of our kids that, like, I've got a little one I did recently, and she was older elementary kid, you know, rocking it at her education as far as getting A's and B's and socially doing well in school. I mean, there just wasn't any concern at school because that was her safe place. And so that's where she actually really did. That was why it was her strength. I've seen that with high schoolers too, where they dealt with all the drama by going to school and being the best at school they could be. So you'll see that every once in a while.
And you see the words exceed expectations again in the education. So, and it's not necessarily a child who has good grades, but it's like, man, that school, you know, they put a 504 plan in place and they're following it to a T, and they've reached out to the therapist, and, like, they're really impressing me as far as, you know, meeting our needs. So, you know, digging into the manual a little bit, if you're confused about some of the ratings, can help you kind of understand that. And then also, you know, talking to the therapist or the assessor if they're available, which we do try to make ourselves as available as possible as part of the treatment team. so that we can help, flesh out the treatment goals as best we can.
And I will say a lot of kids that come in for a CANS and either want counseling and haven't been able to get it, or they're on a waiting list, a lot of times they'll just walk out to the lobby and then we end up getting a phone call because they just are like, I just want to go back to the person I just talked to because they now know my story.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we've done this really intensive CANS with them and they're like, actually, can I come? I've had that happen quite a few times. They're like, can I just come talk to you a few more times? And I'm like, you really don't need counseling, kid, but if it makes you feel like you have somebody to listen to, then you may need it because they just needed somebody who wasn't in their family to listen to them for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. So we might do 3 sessions and then they're good, because you might be like, why did you put that kid in counseling? Well, sometimes they come in and they talk about it and they're like, that felt really nice to just tell somebody about my story. And so if you see a kid that maybe has a lot of zeros and ones and you're thinking, why in the world are they doing counseling? Sometimes that's why. They just enjoyed having somebody to really help them further understand their story. All right, I'm going to speak out because I have a session soon. But thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all. And we really love our classes and everything y'all do for kids here in Abilene. So thank y'all so much for taking your time and doing that.
Crystal, it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
See you.
Okay, that has been, just a little bit deeper dive into some CAN stuff. Do you guys have questions based on what we've talked about? I can't see the chat box. Let me stop sharing. Looking. Okay, there's nothing in the chat. Does anybody have questions they just want to shout out?
Stephanie, I had a quick question. Can we get the CANS manual? How
yes.
do I get that?
Yes. Let me see if I can throw it in the chat box. Oh, no, I have it PDF. So
you can email it to me and I can email it out then.
Yeah. I'll send that to you in a link form so you get the latest version.
Oh, good. That would be great. And then I did have a question real quick on the CANS. It's done in the first 30 days. We know, as you said and Crystal said, that it can change dramatically after those 90 days. If we see a dramatic change or we feel that that it's not that current, can we request to have a new one done?
So that's a tricky question.
I know. Yeah.
So billing wise, like as you can't just send them to a therapist that they're not seeing and have them bill for a 90-day CANS because it cannot be billed.
Okay.
Only an annual CANS can be billed unless they are a moderate or specialized level of care, which I know depending on who the provider is, if it's too engaged, we're not in that level of care system anymore. But if they're like region 9, region 1, they may have that level of care still. So they could be a moderate or specialized and get a 90-day CANS. However, I think that the system, I'm not sure if the system will even let you in to do one until it's been a full year. So, but what my recommendation would be is to, have them meet with a therapist regularly. And probably most of our kids need therapy. We love to get our kids in for CANS and then keep them. Like Crystal said, they have to tell this really intense story and start forming a relationship. And so if we can just continue to see them in services, they don't have to start over again. But if you have a kid that has a CANS and you're like, that doesn't really match what's going on right now, I would say step 1 is to get them into therapy. And their therapist can just, I don't know if the therapist can go in and change anything in CANS or not in the system. So, but it is a good question.
They could give us a verbal, or even their notes could reflect the updates.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the therapist should be sending in notes or recommendation to the treatment team for their treatment plan. So if they're actively involved in therapy, that should be happening on a regular basis. So,
okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. See, do you provide the CANS assessment for school counselors and teachers of kiddos in foster care? We personally do not provide the CANS to anybody. Where it goes is into the Texas Health Passport. Are you guys have access to the Health Passport?
We do, and we are now finally utilizing it. We haven't used it in years because we didn't have access to Health Passport, but now we do. So that is something that all of our advocates can get through their supervisor, who gets it through Selma or Sandra.
Great, great. So you can access that through the health passport. As far as sharing with school counselors and teachers, I mean, that would be kind of up to the treatment team if that's necessary. I would say though that probably the best thing to do for the school counselors and teachers is to just kind of go through, you know, the trouble areas or the target areas that you're looking at. So, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't share that if it was necessary, but we're not, legally, we can't share it with anybody. But as the parent, DFPS has, you know, ability to share with other people or to engage now as, you know, the sub-parent or whatever they call that. So, but, you know, they have more ability to share these documents. We're bound under therapy patient confidentiality. So
talk to your team about that.
I just
before
know
you
that-
share that.
oh, go ahead.
I just know that a lot of times the school counselors are the ones doing the 504s and setting up that information. So it could just be so valuable for them to have access to this. And I just, because I'm a COSTA, I know about it now, and I'm also in grad school for school counseling. And when this webinar or whatever came up, I was like, oh, that would be so great for them to also have access to. So I was just curious.
You probably can, Kayla. You would just need to get permission. And like Stephanie said, you can share the child's needs and strengths as far as in general, like here's their needs. Remember, Judge Ruttenberry says that we're there to gather information, but if it's in the child's best interest to share some information, then we can do that to those key people in their plan. Just talk it out with your caseworker, your supervisor, and, you know, just kind of have that team meeting about that.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
definitely, if there is something in the CANS assessment that is about education and their recommendations that say, you know, they need a 504, they're struggling with this, or, you know, the school counselor, the teachers are not teaming with the child, that would be an area that needs to be addressed with the school directly, whether or not they have access to the CANs. And that should be like in the action steps from the therapist as a recommendation. It's just like, it seems like there's a lot of tension with the school and maybe some communication's not happening, or maybe it's a kinship family that's really learning the school navigation system for the very first time and they don't know who to talk to or what to do. And so for those recommendations to be, you know, we need help with the school. And so getting that communication line started would be a recommendation. So
Good
other
question.
questions?
Do you guys have other questions for Stephanie?
Stephanie, when we see the CANs and we see that the last CANs was, say, in August of 2019, and we've done this, we've asked the caseworker, isn't it time for a new one? Is that the correct person to ask, or does it go somewhere else?
So yes, but if they're expired for a CANS, if they have a therapist, that therapist can do the CANS. It just has to be within a certain, like it can't be too far in advance of their expiration date. It has to be like within a week or so. So, you know, you could actually, if they're in Abilene, you could call us and we could just get it scheduled if they don't have a therapist. If they did one with a practitioner the year before or have a therapist, I would recommend that the therapist, if they're certified, do that CANS with them because they have the best relationship. But if they don't, if that therapist is not CANS certified, or if they don't have a therapist, then you can kind of reach out to us or another CANS provider to get that done. So there's not like a formal process on our end, but typically we get referrals from child placing agency case managers. So that seems to be, I think that they're incentivized to keep that and get fined if they are out of compliance with those.
Other questions? You guys are a quiet group today. All right, Stephanie, anything else on there that you wanted to share while they're thinking about that, or?
No, but I do have my last, here, I'll share my screen one more time. Takes me a minute every time, sorry. My very last little bit. I'm never good at following a PowerPoint, but here's our information for our counseling center. We've actually changed name to the Family Center because we have more than just counseling now. But at the bottom, there's our phone number. You can also make a referral from our website. So if you guys, screenshot that or jot down our number or something, or if you have any questions about a Funky Cans, feel free to email me or call and, we can chat about it. So.
Well, and I think it's great for our advocates to understand what a great resource the center is for us. When we have, like Crystal came with Megan Harbin last year to do our TBRI training. And so to know that we have that resource here in Abilene when we have children that need more of that trauma-focused assistance, the play-based therapy, which we really did a lot of training this year on the different types of psychotherapy, whether it was play therapy, sand therapy, EMDR. And so we're really trying to up our game on getting our kids the right kind of help, not just checking the box, but what specifically will help them have that breakthrough. So it's wonderful to know that you guys are offering those services there and we can request those. And I think that's just an amazing resource for us to have. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
So guys, do y'all have other questions for Stephanie? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to have Stephanie, was there anything else on your PowerPoint? Sorry, did I cut you off?
Oh, I mean, I don't usually follow my slide. There are more slides and pictures, but we said everything that we were going to cover, so.
Well, that's good. That's okay. I'm going to get you to pick a number between 1 and 17 for me.
4.
Jean, good night. Jean gets one of our CASA mugs. And Stephanie, I don't think you got one of these last year. Did you? But sometime
No.
in the future, we have one of our CASA mugs for you. It's in Christmas wrap because that's the only wrap big enough to go around the mug. But we'll have one of those for you next time we get together.
Awesome.
So, Jean, good night. You get a mug and it'll be up here waiting on you. And then if you'll pick out another number between 1 and 17.
12.
Kimberly, you get one of our CASA pens, and which, they're great on your lanyard or whatever. So Kimberly, you get a pen. So, okay, well, Stephanie, anything else you want to share with our group before we end?
That's all. Thank you guys so much. I know cans is a little bit of a dry topic, but we really get excited about it. So, once you know more about it, it really does mean a lot more than just a few, lines in the treatment plan. So I hope you guys learned something today. So.
Well, I definitely did. And I think it's a great tool for us. And now that we're getting into Health Passport and we can review those more easily, I think it's a great tool. And I love knowing that if you get one that's older and it doesn't have as many details in there in the notes, that we should try to follow up with that therapist to see if we can get more in-depth information. And I love that Crystal and Jason are right. My brain went blank for a minute. That they're, getting where they're putting more and more information in there, because the more info we have, the more we can advocate for those needs and know how to help that child. So thank you guys for all that you do over there, for just being so kind to answer questions and letting us reach out to you, and always being willing to come and share your knowledge. And what a blessing you are. We appreciate you very much. So, yeah.
Well, thank you guys too. Thank you so much.
Will y'all give her another round of applause and appreciation? And Stephanie, thank you so much. And we'll be reaching out. I'll share that manual with you guys when I get it from Stephanie. And remember, we don't have a lunch and learn next week. We'll have one in 2 weeks. And that's the end of our presentation. So thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Bye.
Bye.